Hey everybody, I'm Elysia Buss, host of Horsepower Empowerment Through Connection, and today I have the great privilege of getting to hang out with Russell Chamberlain, located just outside of Portland, Oregon, and he has an amazing story to tell us today in his work in LifeSTREAM Therapy as he connects with horses in different populations through the EGALA model. Russell, thank you so much for being here on the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I was telling you before we started recording
that everybody, I'm Elysia Buss. Oh yes. Today and we get to we're working. Go ahead and just mute it on your side. It should be fine. Just on the video. There we go. It's always fun to work on technology and figure out all the pieces. Thank you for staying with us. And remember, everybody that's watching today on the live, that if you have any questions that you would like me to ask Russell, I'm sure he would be happy to answer anything that you would like to bring forth. So, Russell, when did you start your journey with horses?
I was saying earlier, I was born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky, and we had a horse and a couple Shetland ponies. For a few years when I was young. Didn't do much but look at them and occasionally groom them. And that was my first exposure. And of course, being in central Kentucky, I was around the industry, getting to see driving past, not going into, but driving past the big horse farms and being exposed, getting to go to Keeneland, the racetrack that's there. And then later on, fast forward to about 25 years ago, I was working on my master's degree at Arizona State down in Tucson and had the good luck to connect with Sierra Tucson, a residential treatment program that's down there. They had a program called On-Site Workshops. It's now based in Nashville, just outside of Nashville, that was starting to do equine assisted psychotherapy in 5-day workshops with folks that flew in from all over the country. I got to do my master's practicum, both at Sierra Tucson and at On-Site. And one of the things I interned with was an equine workshop that they were doing. And they called it workshop, but it was really 5 days of intensive therapy for folks. And I'd grown up doing experiential kind of work and had done lots of experiential challenge courses, ropes courses, climbing walls, facilitated those and run trainings all over there about helping folks facilitate that. And then been a wilderness instructor. Then I go to grad school and I show up for this workshop. And it was like magic. So awesome to experience what the horse brought to the session that I had kind of dreamed about. What my preference is being really present, experiencing that felt sense of safety and connection with folks. So that was my first introduction. Again, 23 something, 22 years.
Now you were working with EGALA just like close to when they first started. Isn't that correct?
Well, I got On-Site actually trained, I think, Greg Person and Lynn Thomas. And then they went and set up EGALA after they did a training with On-Site. And then I don't know how long it was ago, 20-something years ago, I did one of their initial certifications. And I was pointing out earlier on my shelf as sort of the first or second edition of the training. That was my first exposure to it back then. I've been much fortunate in the last 4 or 5 years to be able to do a lot more of the work. But it's always been something that everything else seemed not necessarily phony, but not remotely as productive in comparison to the benefit of having a horse in the session, letting the horse lead the session.
What was watching the evolution of equine assisted learning and mental health through EGALA and the different models that you've watched arise over the last 20 years?
What's that like?
Yeah, what's it been like for you watching the evolution of the equine assisted learning and mental health field in connection both to like EGALA for the equine assisted growth and Learning Association. That's what that stands for, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
And then watching that, like the evolution is more and more people came into the fold and began their own models.
I think one of the things I appreciate, and I don't consider myself an insider or not like a trainer, an EGALA trainer, or natural life trainer, or PATH, and those are probably the three largest organizations. But I think they brought a level of professionalism and ethics, reinforcing the idea of the benefit of primarily, not that it's the only way to do it, but primarily ground-based work, as well as having a model that supports a team approach facilitation, so that you have a licensed mental health therapist, you have a certified equine professional or equine specialist, and the star of the show, the most important part of the whole process, is the equine, the donkey or horse in the process, and really reinforcing that the equine is an equal part of what's going on, and that their welfare, their sense of safety is as important as the other humans that are in the paddock or in the arena with them at the same time. And having the equine specialists have their focus kind of on the horse, and the mental health therapists have their focus on human or humans, depending on how many folks you got in the session, really provides an opportunity that's that's unique. So I think over the years, my sense is people have struggled more on what model is more appropriate. Natural lifemanship, I think, has done a really nice job of bringing trauma focus. My bias and a lot of other folks' bias is that trauma is far more than just isolated events of PTSD, that we have childhood, developmental, complex trauma, that trauma, like if you read Gabor Mate's work on addiction, that trauma is sort of the primary component in most folks who are struggling with substance use disorders, compulsive behavior, that there's some type of attachment, neglect, attachment issues that folks struggle with. And again, the overall ability just to be present, to stay in the moment rather than being focused on the future, what might, what could, what probably, or the past, what happened before, the woulda, shoulda, couldas.
So in regards to that, and we spoke a little bit about polyvagal theory. Could you explain to our audience what polyvagal theory is?
Polyvagal theory is really a way of providing, I think, a foundational look at the way we interact with others. And I don't think it precludes any particular approach or modality in psychotherapy. But what it offers is the idea that our nervous system, Stephen Porges was the person who started 30 plus years ago doing research with mice, and then developed this theory of how we experience the world. 80% of the information we get comes from the ground up through our body. Vagus nerve is part of the transportation system to what we consider, before we really thought about it much, what we considered just being sort of from head up. 20% of the information that we get is top down. Most therapeutic models are cognitive based. And what we know from research about the efficacy, gold standard, empirically based practice kind of stuff is that the therapeutic relationship is the key component. Skills are important. What type of work the person is coming from, that's their primary issue, whatever their diagnosis might be if you're going from a medical model. So polyvagal theory looks at, for me, the basic idea that horses in particular experiences, am I safe or am I going to get eaten? And if I'm safe, then I can connect. If I'm safe for a horse in the wild, horse can go on eating, which they do all day long. They can care for their foals. They can watch for predators. So we do the same thing. We experience the world in terms of, is it safe am I in danger, which brings up fight or flight, again, which tends to manifest with an anxiety of future focus, or we go into shutdown. We go into immobilization, which again has that past focus. So that can be experienced as freeze, can be experienced as shutdown, dissociation, and the issues that come up for folks around trauma in particular, sexual assaults, mass shootings, those kind of things. Disassociation, the idea that our mind leaves in order to protect us, our body shuts down, our heart rate decreases, our respiration decreases, and we literally go into life protection mode so that we're going to survive whatever the attack from the predator might be.
And then
that's part of.
Sorry.
Pardon?
And then with the horses, we talked about co-regulation as well. Can you speak on that?
Yeah. So if I'm not experiencing life threat, if I'm not experiencing danger, then I'm available for connection. I'm available. Connection is what we seek. Again, Porges talks about the idea that we seek connection the moment we're born. We look for that. Attachment theory is all about relationship and connection. So what horses can do really, really well is show us what it's like to be present moment by moment. A lot of times we talk about the idea that there may be one of the members of the herd might see a plastic bag floating by outside the fence and freak out. With the way they share information and cortisol, the horse doesn't like start hollering and say, hey, danger, danger. The horse just experiences that sense of danger, and the rest of the herd picks up on it, takes off and goes in the opposite direction as far away as they can get. I think it's like, a mile and a half or something in the wild. Or they go to the very far edge of the paddock, and then they look around and go, dude, it's just a plastic bag. But the point in all that is that they then immediately after, and of course they don't even stop for a moment to complain to their herd mate, why are you getting excited about a plastic bag again? We talked about this. What they do is they go back to eating.
Yeah.
They release and get over it right away. That's another really valuable tool for helping folks learn how to be present, that the horses show us how to let go. And they also show us, they provide, from the mirror neuron perspective, they provide us the opportunity to see what it's like to be congruent, that our insides are matching our outside. If I'm sad on the inside and I'm faking it, if I'm angry on the inside and I'm not sharing it, then the horse will not do with us the kind of stuff we want to do. They won't be with us in the activity that we're doing. They'll say, nope, I'll wait right here. When you're ready, let me know.
When you're ready. Speaking of different experiences, can you share some profound stories of things that interactions some of your clients have had with the horses and how it's helped them?
I think one of the experiences I was thinking about was from a few years ago, where again, in comparing models, I had been working sort of from an Igala perspective on what they call clean language, and had been working with two different clients, both young women, both probably on the high end of the spectrum, with Asperger's, who struggled with relationships, with social anxiety all of their life. And they both loved horses. They would come every week, sometimes multiple times a week, and hang out, groom, and maybe do a little bit of leading. And a new equine specialist that we hired came and said, would you be interested in seeing this thing I do in training and coaching, where we do what's called a join-up activity, which doesn't involve using a halter or a lead rope, but you're in a round pen? And I said, sure, let's do that. So we did it with both of these clients. In one case, this young woman who was about to graduate from high school, who had never been able to be in regular classroom. She was intelligent enough, capable enough to be in a classroom, but because of her dysregulation that she would experience, that internal sense of that felt sense of being unsafe, whether fight or flight or shutdown. In her case, it was mostly anxiety focused. She was never able to be in regular classrooms, so she had very little self-confidence. She got in the round pen, and we started doing this join-up activity again with no halter, no rope, and it was again like magic. I think I mentioned it the first time I saw the experience, but for her it was significant. She had balance issues, and we were working in a round pen that did not have proper footing because it wasn't used to train horses. And she had balance issues. She was able to stand in the center of the round pen and connect with the horse and have the horse going in one direction, going in another direction, turn and invite the horse to come in, and then walk around the round pen, have the horse follow right on her shoulder. She then, a few weeks later, a few sessions later, her dad had been observing, and I asked her dad if he wanted to go in and have her coach him in doing the work. And she facilitated him doing the join up activity and sounded like a completely different person. She was very comfortable. She wasn't mimicking what the equine specialist and I had said in our sessions before. She was tracking what he was doing, what the horse we were working with was doing. And the other, to get to the other person was in her early 20s. And she showed up initially a few months earlier, only able to whisper and talking with me. And very talented, excellent rider, very passionate about things that she cared a lot about, and again, loved horses. We did that earlier process I mentioned, which was fine. She was fine coming and just hanging out. And then we did the join-up activity in the round pen with her. And her mother was sitting up at the barn, probably 50, 60 feet away. And she told us after the session she could hear her daughter yelling, speaking really loudly to the horse to say, "Come on, get up," clucking, yelling, not in a way of intimidation, but a way of doing what we talk about, of projecting your power, projecting your inner strength through feeling grounded. So she was able to find her voice and share that. And her mom was like, "I haven't heard my daughter speak like that. She's 21. I haven't heard her speak loudly other than having a temper tantrum when she was a little kid in many, many years."
Wow.
So both of those experiences showed me, again, the benefit of what the idea of safety and connection, of grounded, of congruence. And we can talk at some point too, again, relating to interpersonal neurobiology, polyvagal theory. It's all about intention. It's all about feeling that internal sense of presence, having a sense of self-compassion, and then being mindful about the choice that I want to do moment by moment.
Yeah.
Again, horses really help.
So I'm curious, what's it like to be a minority in the field of equine assisted learning and mental health versus a majority in all the rest of your life?
So the idea of being a cisgender male is definitely, we were talking earlier before we started recording about when I was in graduate school and sitting in class and realizing that 95% of my classmates were identified as women. And what I've appreciated over the years, one, is that I have a never-ending need and benefit of working with women and what they bring to the world, as well as being aware of the sense of privilege that I have in being a white heterosexual male, and that the assumptions that I bring to my interactions, how grateful I need to be for that. Again, how to be present, how to be a father to my 17-year-old daughter, how to be a father to my 17-year-old son, again, twins, and how their way of being in the world is part of what I need to bring every day to the work.
Do you ever feel like a struggle when you're doing the work and wishing that you had other men to speak to that also did the work, since there are so few men in the industry?
Honestly, no, until we spoke this morning. And we were talking about the idea of presenting in upcoming gatherings that you're going to have online with men, and the idea of having a co-facilitator, an equine specialist, an equine professional, who is identifies as a male in the session with me. And I was like, I don't know anybody in my metro area. In the trainings I did, natural lifemanship, there were no males in the EGALA training that I did. I don't know about 20 years ago, but I recertified about 3 years ago. There was two males along with me out of 20 participants, I think. And I think one of those was an ES and the other was a therapist. So it's few and far between. I think I would benefit from those kind of discussions for sure.
And when you go to those trainings, like, what's it like? Do the women treat you differently because you are like one of a very few men in those sorts of trainings, or do you feel like there's still everybody treats everybody the same, or what's your experience like going to those trainings?
Never really thought about it. I think at best there's no difference, but I think at best the reality is that we are different. Whether, however I see myself in the world, how I experience the world, whom I'm attracted to, the religion I practice, the sort of economic strata that I'm a part of. I think all that brings something to it. So I think I've been unaware of that. And again,
no, I was just curious, like, because everyone has a different experience when they go to trainings, even if it's all women. They do have a different experience because you practiced at a different model, or if you come from a reining background versus a dressage background versus a hunter jumper like barn. People come with different viewpoints that can be fairly strong within the equine industry just in general. And so coming into a place where people are trying to collaborate and learn something new, it's not necessarily your gender. Like, sometimes gender can make a difference, but it can also have that viewpoint, where you come from. Because I don't know about your experience in the horse world, but I feel like sometimes the different models that you experience and what different models you practice from the standpoint of dressage or English or Western or reining, it can be just as strong in a reactive conversation as discussing religion with some people.
And I think I've gone to hundreds of regular psychotherapy type trainings over the years, and certainly I was almost always in the minority as an identified male person in those settings as well. In some ways, I think there's a piece of self-selection that comes in when we're doing something that has some sort of intentional therapy focus. I think there's probably a difference when those trainings get more in depth, if you move from a fundamentals training in natural lifemanship to intensive, that kind of thing, that there would be hopefully a greater depth of exploration. Because again, it's on the one hand, it's not about the horse, it's about me. And another thing that I've really appreciated, I can't remember who I saw it from, but the horse doesn't know who the client
is. They're just a human. They're just
our horse is you know, it's whoever is connecting with me, the horse, in the moment that I'm paying attention to. It's not even what we experience. It's not my equine specialist, the various members of her herd that she's very present with and day to day takes care of, all that kind of stuff. They can easily ignore her to be with whatever person is doing the work in the round, or being led through. This one facility we have is a Bollinger obstacle course. I don't pretend to understand it again, but it's the sort of fancy outdoor course that folks ride their horses through outside.
So with everything that's been going on in the world with COVID and the riots, like there have been a lot of riots in Portland. I don't know if they're still going every day. I know when I left Washington at the beginning of October, they had still been going every day. And with the election, what are you seeing people really struggling with that are coming in to see you as clients for counseling, for the equine assisted learning with the horses, etc.?
I think the big issue for me boils down to fear and ignorance. And I think we tend to act on our experience of the world, that again, that 80% subconscious, unconscious, that's automatic nervous system protective coping response. And then that causes us to do and say things up here that likely we regret. Certainly in households, that's been the issue and the challenge and the struggle. I think the anxiety, the fear of not knowing what was going to happen in the election, not knowing what's going to happen over the next 76 days, the label that you put to what's gone on in Portland, riots, if you want to go by the strict definition of what the police or the federal folks defined as a riot, then you could say there were X number of riots over X number of nights. It was also a 2-block area in downtown Portland for the most part. There was no impact on the rest of Portland. There was no, the few million people of us who live in the 3-county Portland metro area and up into Vancouver across the river.
You're just pretty like, I'm going to 6 blocks of downtown and everything else is fine.
Yep. And people sometimes would make a point of that and say, here I am in this part of downtown or that part of downtown. Here I am in other parts. And certainly the protests went to other areas of Portland that were fairly nearby, but the violence that occurred was in a really small area around a few federal buildings in downtown. And again, the more important thing to me is that, and what's helped me in avoiding feeding into hate, avoiding feeding into punishing people like we attempt to do over social media about their view or their belief system. To me, it's a fear base. I think whether it's on the national level, it's a fear of limited access to resources. If I'm a wealthy person, it's a fear of the other, somebody who doesn't look like me, somebody who doesn't pray like me, somebody who doesn't love like me. Folks that in their head, being able to justify a lack of character, being able to justify being okay to lie constantly, and saying, being able to justify the things that happen with immigrants on the border.
So what's something
all the
like an activity you would create with the horses to help support people that are struggling with fear in those different aspects of their community?
it's it's simple and it's not. So it's really starting with the idea that in order for me to to let go of anxiety, let go of fear, I have to sort of embrace it. I have to have that sense of self-compassion to say, this is what's coming up for me right now. I need to recognize it. I work with people on the idea of looking at a level of intensity. So on a 1 to 10 scale, 8 or 9 is when I'm feeling out of control, when I'm having a panic attack, when I'm yelling at my partner, when I'm yelling with my kid. And my hope is to help people get more aware at a 3 or a 4 of their experience of dysregulation, whether that's an experience of anxiety, future focus, what might happen, what could happen, or immobilization, shutdown, before I go into complete collapse mode, dissociation, whatever, to help them understand how to be present now so that I can interrupt that process. So being able to deal with fear, in my mind, probably an overly simplified way, is learning how to be present and learning to recognize when I am present. The only time we heal, the only time we grow, the only time we can learn is when we're having that sense of safe, connected relationship. And it's okay for that to be just for moments, because many people don't experience that all day long. Yeah. And helping folks recognize that those moments are everything, and they're part of the goal, and they're part of the opportunity as well, so that I can also begin to, from a neuroscience perspective, part of the idea is that if this has got a really itchy nose, probably just the camera. The camera's on.
It'll be fine.
So
you turn the camera off.
If this is my normal go-to, my normal default, the highway that my neurons take, that get a stimulus from that 80% that's unconscious, subconscious, that take me to a level of dysregulation, whether that's mobilization or immobilization. Safe and connected relationship creates a new neural pathway, and more experiences that I have over time of that increasing, then that becomes the default in a given situation. It's not like the old stuff goes away, but the old stuff becomes less used. So then my default becomes more and more toward feeling a sense of safety rather than my, again, automatic nervous system response, assuming danger, assuming life threat.
Thank you for all of that. And what are some of the populations that you work with regularly?
And part of it's broad because I work in a group practice setting where I get third-party reimbursement from insurance. And so I see about 20, 25 folks a week in that setting. And a lot of that, 2/3 of that is just like this, doing Zoom sessions. And a third is meeting in person in a walled canopy with a propane fire pit, and being able to do about a third of those folks. So I see about 8 folks a week in person that way. And then the equine sessions, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. So I work pretty much ages 12 and up. I work with younger folks in the context of the family setting. So I do work with teenagers, work with their parents, work with co-parents, work with adults. The primary diagnoses tend to be anxiety and depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression. Working with lots of trauma, and trauma's relative. Trauma doesn't necessarily prescribe to economic status. The difference is the more access to resources I have, the consequence of that trauma can be less or not as impactful if I'm not struggling to have a place to live, not struggling to have food to eat. So there's populations I don't work with because I feel like they're out of my scope of practice. I don't work with couples in my office setting because I believe there's really good models that I'm not trained in, emotionally focused therapy for couples and Gottman method. But I will work with couples in the equine setting because I think I'm able to provide them an opportunity. And I will work with co-parents in both settings. So it's, again, I think people being clear on their scope of practice and what their training experience is. And I also am very open to collaborating. Folks, I don't need to, I tell providers all the time, when I've been marketing the past few years, I don't need to take your client away from you. I don't need to take over your caseload.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do a session or two to work with a couple that you're seeing the folks individually, to work with somebody who has bipolar disorder, which is not one of my specialties, to work with people that struggle with psychotic disorder, and to collaborate with someone who's an expert in that setting.
Yeah.
So kind of a wide variety based on, again, boiling it down to being present, self-compassion, and mindful choice.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. So I love wrapping up all of my interviews with this last question, which is, who inspires you in the world, Russell?
Who inspires me in the world? I watched one of your sessions last night and was reflecting on that. I think my daughter, 17-year-old, who has had all the benefits of food, clothing, shelter. She's had the benefit of having an expert in the house who's worked with teenagers for 30 plus years, which is that's not necessarily a benefit. But she suffered some sexual assaults when she was younger, and had some significant trauma and anxiety that came from that. And despite her mother and my best effort to support her, we were unable to do that. So she inspires me with the work that she's done to deal with that, and continues to deal with that. And particularly over the last 2 years, what the gift that her experience of recovery has been to me is a greater sense of vulnerability, greater sense of transparency for myself, because I suddenly was having to both market to and ask help from mental health providers and folks in the recovery treatment field, and then sharing being in peer support groups as a parent, and having to share my story and address imposter syndrome. Like, how can I look another parent or another teenager and say, I believe I can support you in whatever your goal is toward health. How can I do that when I've failed my daughter? And what I've recognized over the last couple of years is I have been doing the best I can. And I'm doing all the things that I talk with my clients about. Be present. Recognize my own internal sense of regulation or dysregulation. And be really clear in relationship that if the example I use is that one person's dysregulated and the other person comes in regulated, then I can be with the other person and support them in coming to a sense of regulation. Or if as soon as I get dysregulated, I need to be able to back away until I find that sense of regulation. Again, the same thing that horses do in the session work.
Thank you, Russell, so much for sharing so vulnerably of your story and your daughter's story and your journey with the horses. And I just really appreciate you coming online and sharing all of that with the audience today. And I hope that your daughter continues to heal and get the help that she needs in that supportive transformation. And for your growth as well.
And thank you again, Scratch, for all the work that you're doing with you've got the Global Men's Summit coming up in less than a week, and the efforts you're making to connect and share the work that's happening all over the world. I really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. You're very welcome. It is absolutely my honor to get to do so and get to talk to people like yourself. So everyone out there, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you got some great value out of today's interview. And until next time, bye.